What is up, guys? It is Quinn here, and in this video, we're going to be running through my wide receiver start sits for week 6 of the NFL season. So first week where we actually have bye weeks, so only 14 games instead of the 16 we saw through 5. They're going to be timestamps down below in the description. So if you guys want to jump around to specific matchups, that is totally fine. You guys probably know the drill by now, separating these players into 3 categories. Starts, we want these players in our lineups. A fringe category, basically like low-end starts. And then we have sits. We want to keep these guys on the bench. If you guys have any fantasy questions, you can drop those down below in the comment section. I'll be getting back to every single person. And if you guys are interested in jumping into some best ball drafts, if you guys aren't familiar with what best ball is, basically you just do a draft, but you don't have to actually manage your team. You guys may think, you missed out on best ball not getting in before week 1, but on Underdog, they have best ball resurrection. So basically it's a best ball league from week 6 on. So obviously if you guys want to jump on that, you got to do it soon. If you guys are going to be joining Underdog, if you use code Quinn or use the link in the description, they will double your first deposit up to $100. So if you guys do want to take advantage of that, link in the description. But let's jump into the Thursday night game. And actually before we do that, I just want to, go through the 4 teams who are on bye. So we've got the Lions, Texans, Raiders, and Titans. So just keep that in mind. Those are the teams who will not be playing this week. But for Thursday night, we have the Commanders taking on the Bears. For the Commanders, I think we continue to fire up Samuel and Terry McLaurin as very solid starts. And then we are going to be sitting De'Ami Brown. Now, I understand he went out, he had a massive day, but we do have to look a little bit closer, than just looking at the box score. He only had a 37% route participation. Now, he did turn that into 3 targets, 2 receptions for 105 yards and 2 touchdowns, 24.5 PPR points. In reality, this is just like a random boom week. We'll see this every once in a while. Like, what was it? O.J. Howard had a big boom week. I think Mo Alley Cox had like a 2-touchdown day. It happens. He's not close to startable at this point. He was outsnapped by Cam Sims. This is the role that Jahan Dotson had. It doesn't look like he's going to be back here in week 6. If he is back, I think he's like sit to fringe territory, but that's, a situation we're going to have to evaluate when it does come up. For the Bears, I'm just going to be continuing to sit all these wide receivers. The passing game has just not been good enough to support any of these guys. Moving over to Sunday, we have the 49ers taking on the Falcons. For the 49ers, Deebo Samuel, automatic start every single week. Sitting Brandon Ayuk, who just hasn't been able to carve out a big enough role in this offense. For the Falcons, I do want to talk about Drake London a little bit more in depth here and basically just, take this time to rant about Arthur Smith with some more coaching negligence. So over the last few weeks, I've been talking about how we use Kyle Pitts, most notably last week where, he had like Parker Hesse taking more snaps than Kyle Pitts, just crazy stuff like that. So we find out Kyle Pitts isn't playing in this game. So of course, Arthur Smith can't just, cool it. He's got to take it out on Drake London. So we see Drake London get outsnapped by Olamide Zaccheaus. Olamide Zaccheaus also ran more routes than Drake London. Now, hypothetically, if someone could try to rationalize the Kyle Pitts thing, you could maybe make an argument saying like, they don't want to be predictable. If Pitts is in, they know they're passing. Maybe this other dude is a better, blocker than Kyle Pitts. Maybe you could make that argument. I still would not agree, but it's an argument that could be made. There is no reason why Olamide Zaccheaus should be on the field more than Drake London. I don't care if he's a better blocker. Drake London needs to be on the field close to 100% of the time. If there is one wide receiver on the field, it needs to be Drake London. If there's multiple, Drake London also needs to be on the field. So he only had a 62% snap share, 65% route participation, just crazy usage for your young stud wide receiver. I still do believe he's a start moving forward. He's had 2 down weeks in a row. It's tough when you have a player who has to kind of deal with, opposing defenses and also has to compete with their own coaching staff. But that's just where we're at here with Drake London. A little fired up on this one, but, I still think he's very talented. I still think he'll produce, but it would just be nice if we could have Arthur Smith come out and, just put his weapons in good positions, get Pitts the ball, get Drake London the ball. We haven't seen it yet, but, maybe that shifts moving forward. I'm definitely not going to be holding my breath, though. Next matchup is the Patriots taking on the Browns. And for the Patriots, only fantasy relevant wide receiver here, Jacoby Myers, locked in start. He has been an absolute stud in his first 3 games. So he missed week 3 and week 4. So only has 3 games played this season. But in those 3 games, he is averaging 17.6 PPR points per game. And he's doing that with only 1 touchdown. So a lot of volume there, a lot of, overall receiving yardage. He's not a guy who's being carried by touchdowns. So 17.6 points per game the last 3 weeks. He has a 29.7% target share. That is 8th in the NFL. He has a 35.8% target rate. That is 5th. I think, moving forward, we have to view him as a top 24 wide receiver. Maybe he regresses, but at this point, the consistency and the volume he is receiving on a week-to-week basis, that is someone who needs to be locked into our lineups. On the other side with Amari Cooper, he just continues to produce, and I really think people who drafted Amari Cooper are getting a league winner. If you drafted Cooper, you were probably expecting like wide receiver 3 production until Deshaun Watson came back, and then you were expecting the boom. Amari Cooper is giving you like top 24 production with Brissett. If Deshaun Watson comes in and, is a stud, Amari Cooper could be like a top 12, top 10 wide receiver down the stretch. So he has been a fantastic draft pick so far this season. Now moving over to the Jets-Packers game, honestly, just kind of a gross wide receiver situation for both of these teams. Starting it off with the Jets here, I have Garrett Wilson listed as a fringe start, and then I have Elijah Moore and Corey Davis as sits. So since Zach Wilson has returned, the Jets are winning. They're 2-0 with Wilson as the starter, but unfortunately for fantasy, it really just has not translated to, production for these wide receivers. We saw Corey Davis have a big day in week 4, but, this week, nothing really happened here. Just getting it out of the way, Elijah Moore has just been a massive swing and a miss for me. He is someone I was very in on. I had a lot of shares of him coming into this season, and he has just been brutal. Hasn't even scored double-digit points so far this season. I still believe in the talent long-term in terms of like dynasty, but I can't just keep pushing it back like it'll happen, it'll happen, it'll happen. It's not looking great for him this season. If you're in a league where, you have solid waiver wire, options, I don't think it'd be crazy to drop him. I mean, some of you guys have probably already dropped him, but yeah, just kind of wanted to take the L on that Elijah Moore call out. He's also not even like leading the team in routes anymore. That was always like the calling card. It was like, he's not producing, but he's still the number 1 most routes. We actually saw Corey Davis take the lead in routes this past week, which is also a little bit of a negative for Garrett Wilson, but both Elijah Moore and Garrett Wilson were within a few routes of Corey Davis, so it's not like a huge disparity. I still view Garrett Wilson as the number 1 option, but I'm definitely not super stoked about starting any of these guys in my lineup. So, like I said, Wilson is a fringe option, probably a lower end fringe option, and then I'm sitting Elijah Moore and Corey Davis. For the Packers, pretty similar in terms of just like a kind of grimy situation here. I have Lazard and Romeo Doubs still listed as fringe options, Randall Cobb as a sit. Overall, it was quiet games from Lazard and Doubs. Lazard did get into the end zone, which kind of saved his fantasy day, but in terms of like volume, yardage, not really much going on for Lazard and Doubs. Randall Cobb was the guy who came out and really had the day. 13 targets, 7 receptions, 99 yards. We still saw Allen Lazard have a 95% route participation. Doubs was still up there at 88. So good signs for those two dudes. Cobb was at 71. I don't think Cobb is going to be someone who's fantasy relevant moving forward. So I still think Lazard and Doubs are like back-end wide receiver 3s, high-end wide receiver 4s. And then Cobb, like I said, still don't think he's startable after one decent performance. The next game we have here is going to be between the Jaguars and the Colts, and I'm still going to be rolling with Christian Kirk as a start. We saw him have a super hot start to the season through 3 weeks. Week 4, he didn't do much, but the volume was there. The real concern was here in week 5, where just the volume wasn't there. He wasn't producing. I still think he's going to be the wide receiver 1, but it would be nice to see this Jaguars offense pick up a little bit, because, Christian Kirk is going to need some decent, high-scoring performances from this offense to really reach his ceiling this season. Sitting Marvin Jones, who had a big day in Week 5, and then also sitting Zay Jones. For the Colts, I'm still firing up Michael Pittman as a start, and then I actually have Alec Pierce here listed as a fringe option. He has put together back-to-back 80-yard receiving games. That's super impressive, especially for a rookie wide receiver. I think he's going to continue to earn more and more opportunities. He saw a 75% route participation on Thursday night. And I do think he's setting himself up to kind of replace Paris Campbell as the clear-cut number 2 in, route participation, snap share, all of that in the very, very near future. The next game we have the Vikings taking on the Dolphins. So really a solid wide receiver matchup here for the Vikings. Justin Jefferson, obviously a start. And then for Adam Thielen, I do have him as a start here. You're looking at like a mid to back end wide receiver 3 play. There's just going to be these certain games where Justin Jefferson goes nuclear for like 150 plus yards, and it's just going to be tough for any other wide receiver to put together a decent day. And then I'm sitting KJ Osborne, their number 3. For the Dolphins, no matter who's the quarterback, I'm still going to be firing up Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. It does look like Tyreek Hill is dealing with some sort of foot injury. He said he was fine. Can't exactly trust a player in this situation, but if he starts, he's a start in my lineup. Jalen Waddle, I feel like you probably have to temper your expectations a little bit. Like, he's a top 12 guy with Tua. Without Tua in the lineup, he's probably more of like a fringe top 24 play, but I do think they're both still startable, both very wildly talented wide receivers. Next matchup, honestly, another solid wide receiver showdown. Bengals taking on the Saints. For the Bengals, Jamar Chase has been a little bit disappointing so far this season. I still think he's a mid-tier wide receiver 1. He's a start. I have T. Higgins listed as a start here. Not exactly sure what is up with his injury. Sure, he cost a lot of people in their lineups with just like being active. It looked like he was going to play, and then he just like was barely in there. So unfortunate. If he is healthy, I think we fire him up as a start. I think if Higgins is out, Tyler Boyd moves up to the fringe category. If Chase and Higgins are both going, Tyler Boyd is going to stay as a sit. On the other side with the Saints, we've got some injury concerns here. So Michael Thomas has missed the last few weeks. If he's healthy, I'd play him. Chris Olave has been balling out, but he left the game with a concussion. If you guys saw the video or like the replay, it was a pretty brutal like head to ground hit that he did have. So hopefully he'll be back soon. Obviously it seems like the NFL is a little bit more, concerned about concussions after the, negative press they got from the Tua thing and just how that whole thing was handled. It didn't look great. So I'm, a little bit skeptical on if he's going to return here in week 6. But truly, I have no idea. I guess I'm just like talking out of nowhere. And then, I'm still going to be sitting Jarvis Landry, really regardless of what happens with Olave and Michael Thomas. Next game is between the Ravens and the Giants. For the Ravens here, not really sure how to play this one. Rashad Bateman, we don't know if he's going to be good to go in week 6. If he's good to go, I'd list him as a start and then have Devin Duvernay as a sit. If Rashad Bateman is out, then I would swap out Devin Duvernay to be like a fringe option. We saw him have a pretty solid role with Bateman out of the lineup. They wanted to get the ball into his hands. So if Bateman's out, I think Duvernay becomes a viable play. But if Bateman is in and healthy, then I'd be sitting Devin Duvernay. On the other side with the Giants, just got a long list of sits here. Slayton, Tony, Wan'Dale Robinson, Kenny Golladay. All of these dudes are going to be sits. A lot of them are injured. We don't even know if these guys are going to play, but just sitting that entire Giants wide receiver room at this point. Then we have the Buccaneers taking on the Steelers. For the Buccaneers, we know the drill here. Firing up Mike Evans and Chris Godwin as really strong wide receiver plays, sitting Russell Gage and Julio Jones. For the Steelers, I'm still going to be firing up Deontay Johnson. I'm sure people are impatient. He has a fantastic target share. He's commanding targets. As we've seen in years past, the drops have been a little bit of an issue, but I still think he gives you a pretty high weekly floor, and just the touchdowns are going to have to come. He's not going to be a huge touchdown guy, but for the amount of targets he's commanding, the touchdowns will be there at some point. I have George Pickens listed as a fringe play, coming off of back-to-back very strong performances. In the last 2 weeks, he's been targeted 16 times, caught 12 of those for 185 receiving yards. That's 15.3 points per game over that stretch. 86% route participation this past week. It's clear him and Pickett have, a solid chemistry going. I still firmly believe that Deontay is the number 1, but I think Pickens has kind of jumped Claypool as the number 2 weapon. Not in terms of, route participation, but just in terms of production and the looks he is getting on that offense. And then Claypool will be a sit. Next up, we have the Panthers taking on the Rams, and I have DJ Moore on the fringe here. His usage has been a little bit better the past 2 weeks. The first 3 weeks of the season, he had 18 total targets. Last 2 weeks, he's been sitting at 19. So good to see they are getting him more involved. It hasn't necessarily translated to like top fantasy production, but it does at least give him a semi-solid floor. We also saw the Panthers have a pretty significant overall team shakeup. Matt Rule fired, Baker to miss time, so it looks like PJ Walker is in line to start. I don't think he can get much worse. Maybe Walker can prove me wrong there, but they just got to get the ball to DJ Moore, Christian McCaffrey. I have to imagine whoever's coming in, stepping up, going to be running this offense. Just got to get these guys the ball. I'm not expecting them to be a solid unit. I think they're going to be bad, but you at least have to get the ball into your playmakers' hands. So that's really the upside here for DJ Moore. So probably like a net positive with all the things that have happened, in terms of his fantasy value. On the other side with the Rams, continue to fire up Cooper Kupp as, the wide receiver 1, wide receiver 2, wherever you have him, and then just sitting everyone else. Like I said the past few weeks, I still believe Allen Robinson is droppable, just non-existent in this offense. Then we have the Cardinals taking on the Seahawks, and obviously we have Marquise Brown locked in as a start. And then I have Rondale Moore on the fringe. And some people actually may be, a little surprised that I have him as a potential starting option. And it's not even necessarily the fact that Rondale Moore has been insane. He's only played in 2 weeks, had 1 solid game. It's more of the role he's playing and just how productive it has been in this Falcons offense. So when Rondale Moore missed the first 3 games of the season, we saw Dortch fill in for him. And in those games without Rondale Moore, he put up 13.3, 15.5, and then 17-point PPR performances. So 3 really strong games out of Dortch in that role. Then Rondale Moore returned. Dortch got kicked to the curb. He had a down week 4, but then bounced back here in week 5 with 8 targets, 7 receptions for 68 yards. So that specific role between both Dortch and Rondale Moore is averaging 12.5 PPR points per game. So I totally think he's like a viable fringe play, until DeAndre Hopkins returns, which I guess will be after this game. So some exciting news there about D-Hop. Then for the Seahawks, Lockett, Metcalf, both locked in starts. Geno's balling out of his mind. I don't know what happened to that man, but he's looking like a stud, and those 2 guys are definitely kind of reaping the rewards there. Then in probably the best matchup of the week, we have the Bills taking on the Chiefs. For the Bills, fire up Stephon Diggs as a high-end wide receiver 1, and then Gabe Davis as like a fringe top 24 option. I am going to be sitting both Isaiah McKenzie and Khalil Shakir, and I do just want to talk about like this Bills overall slot role. It's been a spot where I think the opportunity is there for fantasy production, but there's just been so much uncertainty here. So for the first 3 weeks, we basically saw McKenzie and Crowder at like a 50-50 split of those slot snaps. Then in week 4, we see Crowder leave with an ankle injury, end up finding out he breaks his ankle. So it's like, okay, McKenzie can take over. He left that game with a concussion. So then Khalil Shakir steps in. Week 5, that would be the opportunity for McKenzie to step in, be the guy. But Crowder's out, McKenzie's also out. So Khalil Shakir steps in, who I really liked, coming out of college. 5 targets, 3 receptions, 75 yards, and a touchdown. McKenzie had been pretty productive in that role, averaging 12.2 fantasy points per game through 4 weeks. And here in week 6, I couldn't tell you what's going to go on. If you told me, if we had a time machine and we, flashed forward to after this game, if you told me that, Khalil Shakir dominated the role, I'd be like, all right. If you told me McKenzie dominated the role, I'd be like, all right. If you told me it was 50-50, I'd be like, okay. I truly have no idea how this is going to play out. I think the general idea is that we want whatever player is taking over that role. So just for fantasy purposes, I hope we do have one player that kind of steps up, whether it's Shakir taking over or McKenzie taking over. That is what we'd want to see for fantasy. But, at this point, we got to wait and see. So we can't be starting one of these dudes because I think you could be setting yourself up for a massive disappointment. On the other side with the Chiefs, this just seems like a spot where we're fading all the wide receivers. I had been someone who was kind of on like the Juju Smith-Schuster safety train, where it's like he had the 1 down game, I think it was in week 2. Other than that, he had been a very safe option. At this point, I don't think he's startable, right? We can't make the safety argument if he has 2 dud games in 5 overall performances. He has no ceiling at this point. They're spreading the ball around a ton, and Travis Kelce's on the goal line. You got Clyde Edwards-Helaire getting a ton of touchdowns. Juju just has not been it so far. Also going to be sitting MVS, also sitting McCole Hardman. Each of these guys are going to have, their individual performances, but just no reliability out of those speedsters, MVS and Hardman. Then in the Sunday night game, we have the Cowboys taking on the Eagles. Some really solid wide receivers in this matchup. Fire up CeeDee Lamb as a probably top 12 option this week, sitting Michael Gallup and Noah Brown. I really like Gallup long term once Dak does return. For the Eagles, fire up A.J. Brown as a top 10 wide receiver, and then Devonta Smith as a top 24 option. And then the final game of the week, Broncos taking on the Chargers. We're firing up Courtland Sutton as a really strong play. I feel like it hasn't been talked about enough how productive Sutton has been in an offense that's just been terrible, right? Like Sutton and Judy were being picked around like wide receiver, 20 to like 24 area. Courtland Sutton has given you mid-tier wide receiver 2 production, and we thought this offense was going to be good. Like they were drafted in that range expecting a good offense. The offense has been terrible, and Sutton has still produced. If this team somehow clicks, like we're looking at legit top 10 mid-tier wide receiver 1 upside here for Courtland Sutton, but we don't need to get into that now. He's a start. Jerry Jeudy here is on the fringe. Disappointing start here for Jerry Jeudy, to say the least. Like I said, he was drafted in that same tier with Courtland Sutton, and Sutton has just totally lapped Jeudy so far this season. He is still clearly the number 2 in this offense. The passing attack probably can't get any worse, at least at this point, but I think right now he's more of like a high-end wide receiver 4 play, which is why he is in that fringe area. Whereas if you drafted him, you were probably expecting a decent wide receiver 2 on your team. He's just not there at this point. For the Chargers, I'm firing up Mike Williams as a start. Keenan Allen, if he plays, is healthy, he's a lock, in your lineups, but we're just going to have to wait to see if that hamstring gets better. And then sitting Joshua Palmer, regardless of what happens here with Keenan Allen. But that is going to wrap it up for all 14 Week 6 matchups. If you guys did enjoy the content, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel. Really helps me out a ton. As always, thank you guys for stopping by. Drop any questions down below, and I will see you guys in the next one.